Hey everybody, spoilers for the Spider-Man Insomniac video game on the PlayStation. So fair warning. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Script Department. I'm John. I'm joined today by Caleb again to talk about Insomniac's Spider-Man on the PlayStation. Before we get into that, if you haven't already, do subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. Just search for The Script Department. Also, check out our website, thescriptdepartment.net, for loads of great content that we get up to with our global network of screenwriters, including script readings. And also hit us up on social media. You can find all the links in the description as well. Okay, so Caleb, before we get into Spider-Man, let's talk about the big news coming out of the industry this week. Probably the biggest industry news, I mean, according to a lot of outlets like IGN and Kind of Funny and all that.
Yeah.
Biggest industry news
and biggest acquisition,
history.
I think.
It's the biggest video game news in history, it seems. And so this is the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft. So that means the Call of Duty franchise, the World of Warcraft franchise, and so many other great games, all now under the Xbox Microsoft banner. It's $70 billion is the 68, 67, somewhere like that. But I mean, at that point, we're just talking about change, aren't we? You're talking close to $70 billion deal. And for, all the potential exclusivity of these franchises, which are, Call of Duty is the biggest moneymaker in video games every year. It's the highest selling video game year after year, according to the outlets like IGN and so on. I haven't looked at the specific numbers, but that is a massive deal that I think lots of analysts, video game industry analysts, but also entertainment industry analysts in general are going to be wrapping their heads around, for the rest of this week and next week.
Yeah.
And for a long time to come, I think this is a deal that probably we won't see the effects of until probably late 2023 or mid 2023, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But this is happening. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm excited. As an Xbox and PlayStation owner, I kind of get the best of both worlds. So I think that Microsoft, what they've been doing just as far as playing the long game of getting back into the running of like the console wars, which are their own thing. I think that they've made small steps early on where they started acquiring. This was a couple of years ago. They started acquiring smaller indie game studios and then putting those on like Game Pass and just owning those. And some of those games aren't even out still, I don't think. And then however long ago the Bethesda acquisition was, which was another exciting step. But now there's this. So I think that it's really exciting to see Microsoft getting back into the game, because there for a long time they were dead, especially the majority of the Xbox One era. Was just there weren't any exciting games. PlayStation dominated. And what's funny is if you look at it, Sony doesn't really have any big like online multiplayers now that Xbox owns the majority of them with Overwatch, Call of Duty, all of Bethesda's and Activision's games. But that tracks with Sony's first party exclusives. Because the reason I have my PlayStation is for those narrative driven story games. And I've never really played online on my PlayStation. That's why I have my Xbox. And so and for the exclusives that I grew up playing, Halo and Gears of War. But so I think it kind of tracks with the reasons why I have both systems on a higher level of looking at where each console stands and with what they have. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I don't I'm not somebody who cares about which console is doing better or anything. Like I really don't care about that. I think that's such a boring conversation. Um, at the end of the day, it's like arguing over Netflix and Amazon. And I'm definitely the kind of industry nerd who can talk about the different strategies all these different streaming platforms are doing. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, if I want Amazon, I'll just get Amazon as well. If I want Netflix, I'll
Yeah.
just get Netflix as well. And if I really want the Call of Duty experience that maybe Xbox will provide, that maybe PlayStation can't provide anymore, whatever that looks like, I'll just get an Xbox eventually. I'll
Right.
just save. I mean, gaming is an expensive
Yeah.
hobby to begin with, so the idea
Yeah.
that I can, like, if I couldn't afford one, I wouldn't be buying games in the first place. I think gamers do accept that there is a price tag for all this, and
Yeah.
I don't care really about who has what.
Yeah.
I've always been more
Well,
interested in the identity that, and I'm glad you mentioned, the story-driven content that PlayStation tends to gravitate towards. I've always been more attracted to that kind of game design and a kind of exploration of the medium of video games. And this is absolutely not a criticism of Xbox at all, but I've always felt that Xbox do gaming better than PlayStation. But I've always felt that PlayStation had a better approach, or at least let's say a more familiar approach to, better isn't the right word, a more familiar approach to the storytelling conventions and types of characters that we gravitate towards in other mediums like television and film. I didn't feel like PlayStation as a brand lost anything in this. And this isn't a PlayStation user trying to defend or trying to, look at things with rose-tinted glasses. But it is,
yeah.
if they lost Naughty Dog, I'd be like, yeah, okay, PlayStation really needs to do something
Yeah.
here.
How did you do that?
Yeah, if it was a case where they had bought Konami and bought Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid, I'd be like, yeah, PlayStation really lost on that one. Because all of those types of titles fall into the brand of PlayStation. And this is connected to the conversation, we are going to be talking about Spiderman, which is one of their most famous IP, first-party IPs of recent years. And what PlayStation brings to the table is a very cinematic experience. It's very story-driven. It's very character-driven. It's very much the idea of, on International Women's Day, they can roll out the great female protagonists of their games, the Ellies and the Aloys and so on. When it's Father's Day, they can say, here's to the fathers of the PlayStation games, the Kratos and the Joel. And they do that on social media,
Yeah.
And it's very much, it's always around the stories. It's always around that experience of living with these characters. I don't feel that the Call of Duty experience gives you that. It used to give you that really well, actually, in its earlier days. And I do believe that the original Modern Warfare trilogy is a pitch perfect story from start to finish. I would love to see that play out exactly as it is in terms of its story and characters as a limited series on HBO or something. I think it's absolutely masterfully written. I love Black Ops, but I do feel that Call of Duty has, I always felt like something happened at a certain point where people weren't talking about the stories anymore in those games. They were talking about the multiplayer experience, and it had morphed into something else.
And now it's Battle Royale.
And all that kind of stuff. Exactly, yeah. And Warzone, which is, I've tinkered with. I've had fun with it. But I very much feel, you are right at home at Xbox. Xbox is going to be able to facilitate this. It's going to be able to grow this into something even better than it ever was. If I'm PlayStation and I'm trying to think, okay, are we losing out? Are we losing consumers because of this? Okay, what do we do? Keep focusing on first-party content, because that's one of the big conversations points that people are talking about. What's PlayStation going to do next? If PlayStation wants to give a middle finger to Microsoft, go buy EA and just deprive every Xbox user of every sports game ever made. You know?
Well, I think EA is somehow with Game Pass. They're partnered. I don't remember how,
Yeah.
but they partnered with Game Pass, so all EA games are on Game Pass, or the
Yeah.
majority of them. So I've got access to all of
Yeah, you
that.
got access.
But
But
yeah,
imagine if every sports game, the Maddens, the NBA
yeah.
games, the Major League Baseball, the PGA games, the FIFA. I mean, FIFA in Europe is just. I don't know how big does FIFA sell at all in the US?
I think so. Yeah, I've never
Yeah.
personally played it, but a lot of my friends have.
Yeah. You see, the
Yeah.
idea that you've never played FIFA is just not a thing in Europe. Everybody has played FIFA, even if you're not a football fan at some point, you know. But you've
Yeah,
played
yeah.
Madden, I imagine, or you've played,
Yeah.
yeah,
They
you know.
used
So
to have NCAA games, like the
yeah.
college football games, and those were what I grew up on. That stopped in like 2011.
But could you imagine if there was some deal? Because I mean, who would have thought? I don't know. It seemed amazing to me that this deal happens at all. Um, Could you imagine if PlayStation or whoever, someone else, buys EA and just says, well, now
Yeah,
we have every sports game. We have
yeah,
the sports genre locked down
yeah,
and no one can touch it.
yeah.
Give us back Call of Duty and then we'll talk. You know, I don't know. As somebody who doesn't play Call of Duty, I'm so happy for you, Caleb, that now you get Call of Duty on your Xbox as opposed to your PlayStation.
I already
That
have it there, so
that's assuming it all goes exclusive anyway. It could just be a thing
yeah.
where
I highly doubt. I think if any studio or company is to like make this move, Xbox is the perfect
mm,
one to do that because they're very much um, like just games first.
yeah.
And which is nice because I don't feel like they've ever really been like we're gonna just completely screw over Sony, which I mean they may have made moves for that, but as far as like publicly, like they're not a part of the whole like console wars debate, and so which is nice because it's like we're just want people to play games and have fun, while still obviously they're a business, um, but yeah, no, I think that like with what they've been doing with Bethesda and Game Pass and game like they've been games anywhere, kind of the first one to do that. And so like you have like I can play on my iPad um, remotely any like as long as I have Wi-Fi, I can play on my phone. Game Pass goes over to if you have your gaming PC hooked up, you can it's all one subscription. So it's like it's amazing.
They are making, and we'll kind of wrap up this conversation because it's obviously not the point of this video soon, but it is, you know, as what Microsoft have done with the Xbox brand over the years is amazing. The Game Pass, all that kind of stuff, everything you've just described. They, when you think about where it all started, it's Microsoft, a computer software company, getting into the business of getting into this other corner of the software industry, let's say, and it's now become fully incorporated into everything that they do. It's as big a part of their brand as Windows or anything like that. They've changed the culture of video game. It really is an amazing kind of a achievement that what they're doing with this purchase, what it represents, what it means for, and it sounds like I'm being patronizing or anything. Like it's, I think no. What I mean is, PlayStation have had that same struggle
Yeah.
because I listen to film critics talking about video game adaptations, and they still talk like computer game adaptations. They fumble with their words. Not that computer game is a bad thing, but gamers don't say computer game.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a kind of a there's certain terminology that has around this industry that still gets used by people who don't play games, and the idea that you don't play games to me is absurd. You might not play games religiously like many of us might, but that doesn't mean you are not exposed to that industry. It's like saying I don't read books or I don't watch television or I don't watch film. No, you just don't do it regularly. But anybody
Yeah.
who's played Candy Crush on their phone plays games. Anybody who's played Minecraft with their kid plays game, like is aware of
Yeah.
this industry. And you don't get to hide behind this behind that kind of, oh, I don't understand games. It's like saying I don't understand literature, I don't understand music. No, you just
Don't take
we,
part in it.
yeah, we don't get to talk like that anymore now, I think,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
this is a $70 billion deal.
yeah,
Disney bought 20th Century Fox, one of the top like major movie studios and television networks, for the same price, almost the same price, a little bit more. So, what does that say about where these games companies are and the value of what these companies bring to the economy and bring to our culture and bring to to the entertainment industry?
yeah. I think some of the most exciting stuff is happening in games right now, which is why I'm so interested in it. I think as a consumer of like the art of video games, if everyone's making great stuff, then we all win.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can kind of pick and choose what to consume, and so which is why Spider-Man is such a good game.
Yeah. No, and we're going to segue now into Spider-Man, one of the big IPs of the I guess the PS4 catalog of games. It's definitely one of their standout first party titles. And it absolutely ties into everything that we were saying about the PlayStation brand, which is character driven, story driven, all about world building and giving that great. And other games companies do that as well in spades, but this just has that PlayStation Studios fingerprints all over it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Um, so, are you a fan of Spider-Man? Or are you? I mean, it goes without saying we're both fans of this game. Are you? Are you? How big of a Spider-Man kind of fan are you?
I grew up, of course, with the Sam Raimi
Mm.
trilogy, which 1 and 2 great, 3 not so great. But yeah, so I grew up on that, watched those quite a bit, um, and now we're kind of in the renaissance again of Spider-Man pushing the limits of the movies, the story, or the games, and animation. So like, there's just everything Spider-Man right now has been pretty great. Um, so it's kind of nice to get back to the first superhero that kind of
It did it for
was
you.
it Stan Lee's first superhero too? Was that his first thing that he wrote?
I couldn't
I
tell
feel
you.
like it might have been.
I'd say it's very early on in his career. I'm sure people will let us know in the
Yeah,
comments. But
yeah,
I feel like it was very. I have this vague recollection of him describing its origins, and maybe he was already up and running at that point in terms of the kind of characters he was creating. But yeah, it's definitely way early in his career, I would imagine.
yeah. Well, and it's funny because like if you get into the whole comic book realm, DC and like the thing that Marvel has struggled with is their villains in a lot of their movies, their early stuff. And DC has always had their like theater of villains that are so good. But I think Spider-Man goes under the radar with his villains because like I have the first 10 like issues of like the original Spider-Man, the first comics, and like all of those villains for the majority like are basically in there, and
Mhm.
so I think that this game highlights that perfectly, and doesn't pull any punches with that, and it even sets up for the next game very well.
Yeah, it's a really strong game for. I mean, I'll get into the game. I mean, as a Spider-Man, I'm a big Spider-Man fan. But I'm not somebody who is so. I don't have the kind of the. I don't have the history down. Like if you ever watched the Bond discussion that we did last week, it's I'm I'm a Bond historian, right? But I'm not
Yeah,
like that with superheroes. I
yeah,
really like. I think I'm kind of getting there with characters like Batman, but Spider Man is definitely one of those characters that grew up on, loved the cartoons, the animated series that they did,
Yeah.
the 90s animated series. Something about 90s animated superhero TV series, Batman,
Man.
Superman, Spider-Man, all those X-Men, all those shows were just so great, weren't they?
Oh, X-Men.
That was the thing that got me excited about Disney Plus was, oh my God, my childhood just came back to me. You know,
Yeah.
it's like just caught up with me. But I loved that Spider-Man. But I loved, because when I was a kid, I hated kid stuff. I loved kind of edgier, more stuff that maybe like when I was preteens, I wanted to watch the stuff that the late teens were watching. When I was a teenager, I want to watch the stuff that, you know, the grown-ups were watching, you know. So I was watching Jackie Brown and Reservoir Dogs before I was 16, you know, which was, I don't advise. But I, you know, this was the 90s animated show was, I loved because if memory serves, Spider-Man was in college at that point. He was studying at university or something. He was in a romantic relationship. There was none of that kind of fumbling that, you know, you get of Peter Parker in high school, or, you know, kind of changing as a person or anything like that. Like, he's been Spider-Man for a while, you know, and and I love that idea of he's got adult responsibilities and so on, but he's still got that walking through the corridors of the school kind of vibe going on as well at the same time. And it explored some, you know, I wouldn't say it's really that edgy or anything like that, but it would explore, you know, romantic relationships and stuff like that. When you're an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid or whatever watching this, you just think this is kind of not, this is beyond, this is a conversation for like the 12-year-old or the 13-year-old or 14-year-old rather than the
old
8-year-old.
kids.
Yeah. This wasn't probably being aimed at me, you know.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to recapture that with Spider-Man. And I didn't get that with the Tobey Maguire movies. I think Spider-Man 2 is great. I think Spider-Man 1 hasn't aged very well. I think it's quite cheesy, you know. And but and the Andrew Garfield ones as well. I've always I hate the idea of Spider-Man being in high school because it's been done so much,
especially when he looks 30.
Exactly. Yeah, that doesn't help things. I get that that's where Spider-Man started, and I totally get that they want to be faithful to that. But I've always looked for a veteran Spider-Man. I love the idea in Batman versus Superman that Batman had been doing this for like 20 years. I love the idea he's got scars on his back. And I want my Peter Parker character to have scars on his back. And I felt like with this game, I got that. And don't get me wrong, I love the Tom Holland Spider-Man. I think he's phenomenal. And I love Spider-Man Homecoming. And I'll get into more of the comparisons about that, because I do think there are kind of similarities there a little bit. But I really got it. I really gelled with this game because, you know, we'll get into the plot. It's Spider-Man. He's been doing this for years. You know, he's probably in his mid-20s, I would wager.
I think 24 or something like that.
But he's got, you know, wisdom beyond his years. He definitely doesn't feel like he's a 24-year-old. He feels like he could be in his early 30s, mid-30s even, in terms of the way he talks, the way he deals with his responsibilities and so on. He's in a long-term relationship with Mary Jane, MJ, and he's working with Dr. Octavius, who hasn't turned yet. And he also volunteers at a food shelter, is it? Or a homeless shelter?
Feast.
Feast.
I think it's both. Like food
it's
and homeless.
A community outreach kind of outreach organization. And that's where Aunt May is based as well, and she has that job. And I love the idea. I just loved the idea that Aunt May has agency in this. She's not just she's not just presented as the
leftovers
somebody we have to be worried about, or somebody that is just the kind of the wise older kind of. She's got life experience, and so she's gonna, you know, slap Peter on the wrist every now and again for, you know, getting too carried away or whatever. It's very much everybody has their role. Everybody's doing their own thing. They're busy. They're active. There's no just kind of sitting around for Peter Parker to walk into the room. Peter Parker has to kind of fight for their time, and it just felt like a very busy, lively world that they'd created in this game. And I was just, from the very beginning, I was just like totally in from it. And so do you want to kind of go through the story a little bit more? We'll concentrate more on the story, I think, and the characters,
Yeah.
and we can talk about how the game kind
I
of
think,
makes use of that.
well, and I think what's so interesting, to piggyback on what you're saying, for me, what's interesting about why they decided to um, pick where Spider-Man is at in his career, in his life, and start us in the middle of it, and like he's already like experienced, he's not jaded, but like he's experienced. And um, it's interesting because this is a origin story for a lot of characters except for Spider-Man. Like you've got Doc Ock, you've got Miles.
Yeah, and if you're not aware, Miles Morales is Spider-Man's kind of Robin almost. I don't want to do a disservice to the character by people saying how could you
Yeah,
compare him to Robin, but
it's been a
he
convoluted.
he is the second Spider-Man of that
Yeah,
of the city, and it has its own spin-off game. Martin Lee is the villain. He's running Feast, the organization, and he turns out to be a character called Negative. Is that correct?
Mr. Negative. Yeah.
Mr. Negative. Do they actually say his name in? Like, I'm on IMDb here, and I'm not seeing him credited as Negative. I think that's probably a bit too cheesy for what they're trying to go for in this. But he is.
Yeah.
Do they say
I
Negative?
don't think they ever do.
The reason
unless it's like a headline.
Yeah, yeah. The reason he's called Negative is because he is kind of his color. He's kind of black and white. Colors are inverted, like a photo negative. It's very.
He's just not a downer. Like he's not just a downer. Like that's not his character.
yeah.
He's just super depressing. Which I guess he is a character from the comics, which I wasn't aware of, but he's a little bit of a newer one. So I think it's interesting that the writers chose to bring in a bunch of so you have like your classic villains. You have Miles, who's kind of, I don't remember when he came about, but probably the middle run. And then now you have like some newer ones, and it's interesting that they decided to put Martin Lee up front, and he's not even the same adaptation from the comics. I think he's pretty different from what I read.
Everything feels different in this.
Yeah,
none of it. Like Dr. Octavius is a very different character than what you get. I think what we've been presented with, or at least from my knowledge. He's the scientist that Peter's working with, and he things go wrong for him eventually. But their relationship feels very much like I'm your mentor, like I'm Peter's mentor character. He's and I'll want to talk about the character relationships in a bit, but just on the just to kind of wrap up the kind of the overall plot. I mean, this isn't a very, very simple plot. The idea is Spider-Man's doing his thing. Martin Lee, there's this villain Negative comes along. He realizes Martin Lee from Feast, where Aunt May works. Miles is volunteering there as well, I think, because he does volunteer in the Miles Morales video game there. So that's why I'm making that connection there. I think that's where he knows him from. And Martin Lee is causing all sorts of chaos in the city, and MJ is helping Peter try and get to the bottom of it. And then halfway through, you play as Miles Morales trying to get through. No, you don't. Sorry. There's a big kind of gathering, a public gathering. Martin Lee attacks, and Miles's father, who's a police officer, gets killed.
Yeah, and that's the first time it does hand over your control to Miles.
And you actually play as Miles then for a very brief moment. Well, you play him for a few moments throughout the game, I think.
Yeah.
But the first kind of experience is that you're trying to get to your father before he passes away, and of course he passes away. And that's a really profound kind of moment in the story, a real turning point for all the characters in the story. And Peter then starts, in his Peter Parker persona, starts reaching out to Miles to kind of comfort him, because he himself has suffered loss with the death of Uncle Ben. And so there's that kind of wonderful connection that they start to form. But what I really found interesting was that he ends up catching Martin Lee, I believe, and then gets sent to the Raft, which is like the floating prison, where all the other villains are. And then Doc Ock turns into Dr. Octopus and breaks everybody out of the Raft, I believe.
Yeah.
And you then he becomes the main villain of the game, right?
Yeah, and I think he's kind of, they hint at like that he's been, at least um more than we've known, he's been kind of pulling the strings somewhat, or starts to pull the
Okay.
strings before we actually figure it out. I don't know when that crosses, but um that's kind of the reveal, is like Negative wasn't really the, like he had his own plan, but he wasn't like the big bad the whole time.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Um
I thought that was a really great. Just take the game like to 11. You know, just turn up the
yeah,
volume
yeah,
even more. It was just that. It was just most games would just be settle on the bad guy gets into jail. He escapes. You got to catch him one
yeah,
more time. Something like
yeah,
that. He escapes and Aunt May is in trouble or something like that, and he's got to
yeah.
rescue Aunt. You know, no, no. We're gonna just unleash every Spider-Man villain all at once. You know, and
Yeah,
it's just this and it's all led by the most personal villain to Spider-Man,
yeah, yeah. Well,
Doc
and that's
Ock.
what like the first two acts set up so well, is like
Mm.
it's such like a intimate game. There's no big, like really big set pieces. I mean, there is at the beginning, but like that's not driving the story. That's like the first one's to get you in, and then the second one's the explosion with Miles' dad. But really, other than that, in my memory, there's not a bunch of like huge set pieces. There's like
Yeah,
there's fights, but it's not really until that the turning point right before Act Three where the Sinister Six comes into the game, and like
yeah,
whenever I was playing that, I was like, oh my god, they actually like didn't hold anything back,
mm,
and we're like, we're gonna give you like all these villains, the Sinister Six, Doc Ock in the same game, but then still into the game with like here's Harry, and enough for a second game to be just as good, hopefully.
I mean, every
Um,
character outside of Venom is in this game. It
yeah,
seems. I mean, not
yeah,
every
yeah,
character, obviously,
yeah,
but
but
it
yeah,
feels like all the key kind of players that you would expect in a Hollywood Spider-Man trilogy are all in one movie,
yeah,
and or sorry, one game.
yeah,
And the thing that it does so brilliantly is it never, you know, whenever a movie comes out and you see loads of villains in it, the big fear you know, people like you and I have is, are there too many villains in this game? Is this going to be, you know, a bit rushed? Like Spider-Man
yeah, yeah,
3 was criticized for that.
yeah,
And in this instance, it's it feels so, it never feels padded, it never feels full.
mm-mm.
Obviously a game has much more space to explore these ideas, but I can find a few games where they've overplayed their cards a little bit. You know, this
Yeah,
never felt that. It felt like you know, you got Wilson Fisk at the very beginning, Kingpin,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
the whole tutorial kind of section, taking down Wilson Fisk. Like they use Wilson Fisk, one of the most iconic characters of the Marvel universe, as a tutorial section. Like that's
it's
how,
funny when you put it that way.
but that's
Yeah,
how confident they are in the
yeah,
writing
yeah,
of it.
no,
You
yeah.
know.
Well, and the confidence to throw everything in that game, and
Mm.
then knowing that they'll hopefully get another game and have like
Mm. Mm.
hopefully the story comes out of that, which I think they had a story, or have a story in mind.
Well,
Um,
Spider-Man 2 has been announced, and
well, yeah, yeah,
it seems like Venom is the villain of that game.
hmm
But I doubt it'll be the only villain. That's the thing, because it's never just one person and one character in these
yeah,
games, is it?
yeah,
So I'm so excited to see what they do next with all these characters. I'm sure Doc Ock or whoever will. If I remember correctly, he did survive, because I don't think they pulled the trigger
yeah. He
on
did.
too many character deaths in this. Um,
No,
the
um,
old rule of if you don't see them die, you know. But
yeah,
yeah, no, I think it's a remarkable feat of writing and
yeah,
storytelling and character design that they were able to work all of these people into the game without it feeling overabundant or overburdened,
yeah,
without it feeling like we're trying too hard, or we're trying to appease everybody, or no, this is all it feels so natural in this world.
yeah.
Um,
Well, so there's a line in the script, in the description, uh, in the script. It says the first time you take control, or no, not the first time you take control. In the first scene of the game, um, he puts on the suit, and in the script it says the music swells. We feel awesome that we're Spider-Man. And so like I think that like even in the script they knew this is what it's going to feel like playing
Yeah.
this game, and the gameplay needs to match that because we've already got it in the story. So I don't know. I just thought that was a nice little line that made me smile.
I recommended to somebody who just got a PlayStation recently to get Spider-Man, and they, you know, they're not a gamer. They're, you know, they got a PlayStation, and so they just were looking for some good titles that, you know, they could say, you
Yeah,
know, they knew they'd just be able to kind of jump into. And I recommended Spider-Man, and they are absolutely loving it. Like they just can't stop talking about how amazing the game is. It's a game that appeals to everyone. It's so easy to play. And
yeah,
that's, I think that's, you mentioned a really interesting point about the idea of how it's a very intimate game. There aren't these giant set pieces. There aren't these, well, I mean, there are set pieces, there are
there
big set
are,
pieces,
but
but
yeah,
it's not about those set pieces. It's not
yeah,
about, let's go to that place over there, or we have to get
yeah.
to that big thing. It's the questions built around the game aren't based on the attraction of, let's say, getting to the raft prison or anything like that.
I
It's
also
more about,
think it's important in that to note that like every mission doesn't end with a big fight or
mm,
anything. Sometimes it just is you walking through and then that ends.
yeah.
Um,
And it's because
so
at the end of the day, the game is broken down into two sections. You are web slinging, or swinging, web slinging. What do you
both,
say? Yeah, I've heard both. I hear both interchangeably,
but
but
yeah, web slinging I think is
web
the
slinging, it sounds cooler than, yeah, I guess.
yeah
But you're swinging around the city,
yeah
or you're button bashing in a fight. And it is pretty much those two things. Now, there's so much cool things you can do in both instances, but the game is either traveling through the city as Spider-Man in the most fun way possible, or you are in a room or out in a street corner beating up bad guys.
yeah
It's it's very simple, and it's no different than the Batman Arkham games. But
yeah yeah.
I think that's
This owes a
why,
lot to that.
yeah, definitely. I think that's why it feels, or why the I think that's why it's so well written, is that the writers understood our game is really just these two things. So uh, let's let's not draw too much attention to that, because
Yeah,
Batman is very
yeah,
much like that. Batman is the great world's greatest detective, but you're really just button bashing or trying to figure out how to open a vent or something. You know, it's, I
yeah,
mean, I'm not, and I love those games. I'm not trying to trivialize those games or anything, but most games have a very basic, simplistic gameplay loop.
hmm
Uncharted is walk into a room,
yeah,
kill all the bad guys, walk into the next room, kill all the bad
yeah,
guys, solve a puzzle occasionally, walk into the next room. And it's, but it's the standout moments of Uncharted are always the moments in between.
hmm
It's, I need to climb up a train to get up to the that's falling over a cliff, to get up onto the ledge so that I can kill all the bad guys on the ledge. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
But it's the train you remember from that moment.
yeah,
And in Batman it's the same. It's the great back and forth between him and Joker, or it's the him asking himself questions about a scene, about a crime scene that suddenly doesn't make sense to him, and you're like suddenly feeling like a detective. It's those quiet moments that make the game. And it's the
yeah,
exact same with
yeah,
Spider-Man. It's as you're swinging through the city, there's someone getting on your ear, you know, in your earpiece, talking to you about something, and it's suddenly, wow, there's this beautiful friendship that's growing between Miles
yeah.
and Peter. Or
Or
there's,
the
you know, you
J.
can,
Jonah Jameson podcast.
yeah, Jay Jameson has his JJ Jameson
Yeah,
has his
yeah.
podcast. He's like he's almost like um a right wing talk
Podcaster.
show. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
become very. There are a few names you could
Very,
rattle
yeah,
off that he's very similar
yeah,
to.
yeah,
You know, I knew
yeah.
exactly the kind of person they were trying to emulate here. Very
Before it
clever.
was very popular too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very,
yeah,
very, very clever.
yeah,
The way they did it, and
yeah,
I yeah, there's just a it's just a beautiful experience playing this game. Not to mention the
Yeah.
fact that it looks exceptional.
Oh
This
yeah.
is this to me is such a great story. The Miles Morales and the um. So I played Spider Man, loved it, and then I got Miles Morales, and I was saving it for Christmas because it is set during Christmas,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I thought I definitely want to be playing this at Christmas. So I waited
Yeah.
until mid December before I booted up, and No Way Home had just come out in cinemas, and I
Yeah.
I knew I wasn't able to go see it, and I was feeling there was this kind of part of me that was really frustrated that I wasn't able to go see it for reasons, and I I kind of kept reminding myself that actually the Spider-Man story that I really want is the one that, like, my favorite Spider-Man storyline is the one that they've created at Insomniac.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, even though they're amazing, I think. And it's not the Tobey Maguire movies, which I think are great as well, or the Andrew Garfield ones, or the Spider-Man animated series, or anything like that. It's these games. And I actually thought, I remember it kind of, as frustrated as I was, I couldn't see No Way Home on the big screen. I was also kind of salivating at the idea that I could play Miles Morales on a 4K TV with my PS5, haptic feedback, all that kind of stuff. And it was an incredible experience. And so for me, like, I'm getting my dream Spider-Man experience in these games. I
Yeah.
really love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like even from the 2000s game, everyone, I think it was PS2 probably. Um, the web slinging swinging in those games, they wanted to recapture that, which is nice because now we have that experience again, but it's something deeper with this great story that's going on. um, and I think like looking at the story itself and why, like looking at why they chose to set it when it's set in Spider-Man's timeline, and tell the story that they told, like to me, um, it all leads up to the Aunt May scene, and like why are we in this point of time, and all of that is to in support of Aunt May's, like the decision to at the very end, if you remember this scene, um, where you have like the serum, and um, they're
So
trying to cure this
explain
is
it for people.
so at the very end of the game, you defeat Martin Lee. There's a sickness on the city. You beat Otto, and then so all of the action is over. Kind of comes back down on a narrative level to like the more intimate scenes, and you go back and like Aunt May's been sick, and so like this is kind of Spider-Man's motivation going into the final fight. Um, and so you get back, they're analyzing the serum to cure everyone, and it won't be done for a day. But but Aunt May is kind of like on her deathbed, and so um, there's this moment where Peter's like, well, what if we give it to one person right now? And so then like the rest of that scene is Peter playing out, should I give it to her? You have this theme of like the needs of many outweighing the needs of the few, um, which is a nice like callback to Star Trek 2 and the Spock and Kirk scene. And so like you have this great thematic scene that plays out between the nephew and his aunt, who's like his caretaker now, and it's just a really powerful scene. And I feel like that is what this whole game, if you ask the question, why are we here, um it's the game is you're gonna be Spider-Man. And so leading up to that scene, this is what it means to be Spider-Man by making these decisions, which then kind of goes back to with great power comes great responsibility. And so that scene just like really makes you feel the weight of what it's like to be Spider-Man. and
Yeah.
put you in those shoes, which is what a game should do. And so like narratively, this all just like is so cohesive.
And it doesn't
Yeah,
give
what
you
were you
the
gonna say?
choice. It doesn't give you the choice as
Yeah,
other games
yeah,
might.
yeah,
It's very much this is going to happen the way we want this to happen, but you are still going to you are still going to have to deal with that dilemma in your mind. That's the great thing that a lot of screenwriters starting out, I think, particularly people writing for games that I've come across in my time, feel they need to force the choice on you. They need to make the choice an interactive experience because
because that's
otherwise,
what's important.
because that's what we want in a game is an interactive experience. But
Yeah,
actually, you can have great interactive experiences where the character's choices are in the hands of the story, in the hands of the designer,
yeah,
not the player. And in most cases, it's more effective that way because all you really want to do is get the audience to ask themselves what they should do, not actually have to do it. And so you don't have to worry about, you get so many games now that worry about multiple endings and all that kind of stuff. And you don't have to do that. You can just simply say, this is what's going to happen in the story. But if we write it in a strong enough way, then the audience will still feel like they've gone through that dilemma themselves. And Spider-Man does that brilliantly. I'm so glad you mentioned Aunt May, that whole part with Aunt May, because ultimately this is a story about Spider-Man has always been a story about, in the way it's been presented in movies and so on. It's always been presented as this is a character who loses his father figure, his mentor figure in Uncle Ben, and has to figure out life and all these chaotic changes that he's going through by himself. And which is so symbolic of the
tragic.
kind of it was so symbolic of the kind of journeys that most young people go through. Loss
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
most people do start to experience loss for the first time, whether it's a grandparent or something like that in their teenage years. I don't know how many friends I've had growing up where they lose an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or someone older. It doesn't have to necessarily be a tragic loss. It can be someone um,
yeah.
who's lived a long life. But the loss is something that you really do start to learn about and start to experience, because even if you don't go through that, you'll know somebody who's going through some loss. Your
Hmm.
world opens up in those years, and that's where you start to experience that. It's where you start to notice the news, what's going on in the news, and what's going on in the real
Yeah,
world, and so on. And you do start to have to carve out your own pathway in life. And Spider-Man has always done that brilliantly. What I
yeah.
love about this game is, in this game, you're playing as the wise old mentor. You're playing as the characters that Spider-Man always yearns for or looks for in other games, in other stories. I love the idea of Tony Stark being the mentor figure to Spider-Man in the MCU movies, because that felt so authentic, that felt so natural. And I was like, yeah, of course, that's the person who's going to, because Peter Parker is a prodigy, just like Tony Stark will see himself in Peter, somebody who lost his father at a young age. There's so many similarities there in terms of their journey. And I love the idea that in this story, Peter is the mentor to Miles Morales. He's the guy who you don't realize you're playing as the mentor figure in this story of archetypes. And when you then play Miles Morales later on, the relationship between Peter and Miles is so brilliant, even though Peter isn't in that game for most of it. And it's so brilliant because they contrive Peter out of it so that you can just play as Miles and be the hero of that game.
Yeah.
But their relationship is still very much present in the game, and it's so much more profound because you're now playing both sides of that friendship.
Hmm.
You're playing as the older mentor and the young protege.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, in the first of those games, Peter Parker is the mentor to Miles, very subtly done so, but he's also losing mentors that he looks up to, or people that he's kind of clinging on to, people like Doc Ock, people like Aunt May. Sorry, remind me at the end, does he lose Aunt May? Or is it?
Yes.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
does. He
Yeah.
does. Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, and she like there's a nice moment where she's like, take off the mask. I want to see my nephew.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
he's
yeah.
like, you knew? And so like, yeah, that's like there's just like so much going on in that scene.
It's a story about people having to find each other. If that doesn't sound too cheesy, it's we're losing people around us, and it's almost like in that loss, in that vacuum that's been created now by all these people that we were hoping to kind of cling on to for guidance in life, we're now finding each other, and it's Miles and I really hope that in the sequel they go down that road of that they're like brothers, because I would love to see. I never feel like that kind of brotherhood relationship exists in superheroes. I think you can get people who will die for each other. You'll get people who will who will absolutely be there to the bitter end with with each other. I think the closest maybe I've come to is Falcon and Captain America in the MCU, in that kind of capturing that feeling. Maybe Black Widow and Hawkeye. Um, but I I think the idea of the protege becoming the equal,
Yeah.
if that's where they're going in Spider-Man 2, I think that's going to be so
Yeah, that
much.
would be
And
really exciting.
you
Because
can explore what drama looks like then in that relationship,
yeah,
because
yeah,
you can
yeah,
have them falling out and coming back together or whatever if you wanted.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think it's interesting because like I've played the first like 20% of I think I'm 20% of the way through of Miles Morales. And like it's interesting because like you start that game and it's like I'm starting as Spider-Man basically, which is what the first game didn't do. So like in terms of origin stories, like you do get Miles' origin story, but like this kind of feels like it should be the first Spider-Man game.
mm.
Um,
But that,
if it wasn't done with such confidence, you know.
mm. And
Um,
again, another real important kind of takeaway, I think, and this is something that you can really take away into screenwriting practice is, there's that old kind of expression, come in late, leave early in
yeah,
in
yeah,
a story. Um, there's nothing wrong with I mean I am so bored by origin stories. I'm so bored by Batman, Bruce falling down the well, or watching his parents get killed, or
Good God, they've been killed so many
I
times.
mean so many times. I'm so glad we didn't get a with great power comes great responsibility flashback in this.
Yeah,
Like, people are, even if people aren't bored of them, I think the game designers know there's a risk of them becoming bored
yeah,
of these. And it's one of the things I really loved. It's the thing that really made me get into Marvel movies properly. I was a big fan of Marvel movies early on. You know, I kind of lost interest after a while. I wasn't kind of sure where they were going with it, and it just felt like I wasn't a big enough expert of the Marvel universe to understand the significance of this or that.
yeah,
I just didn't feel like I knew where they were going with it. I knew that,
yeah,
yeah, they had a plan, but I didn't feel like I understood what the plan was, and so it was hard for me to get excited about the next movie, um, until I saw Spider-Man in Civil War, and I'm like, oh, they're not doing the origin story.
yeah,
He's there, he's been there, and Tony
yeah,
Stark's been keeping an eye on him, and I love that. I thought that was so
yeah,
clever. I thought,
yeah,
yes, brilliant. You're keeping up with the pace of the viewer. And I said,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
I'm going to tune back into this now. And
yeah,
I feel like they haven't let me down at all. Going back through them all, I think I kind of I think I was maybe too harsh. They've done that same thing here for me, where they've respected the pace that you and I and other Spider-Man fans are at, and they know that even the most basic Spider-Man fan will know the origin story. So why are we telling them that same story again? You know.
yeah. Well, and I think that that's what's so exciting right now about all of the Spider-Man properties, is that like I think the creators are aware of this conversation and they're still aware of like how do we give the same thing but do it differently and like explore new themes. So like that's why like the Tom Holland Spider-Man having the paternal relationship with Tony is so interesting because it's like we've never seen that. Same thing with this game. Like you have the Doc Ock story, which is character, which is great, and his development. and then the Aunt May. Like, so you have all of these themes that are crossing over, but being explored differently. That are, I think that that's what makes it exciting. And even in another line, the other line that I had that was in the script was during the Otto and Peter scene at the very end where you've defeated Otto. Um, and he's like trying to convince you that he's still somewhat good. And he gives this speech, and in the description it says that like Otto is a dark reflection of Peter, and they mention that his speech is supposed to mimic Ben's speech, and then they reverse it with the whatever he says next, where it's like Otto's true self flipping that and like showing that reflection, that dark
Mm.
reflection.
Mm.
And so like I like there's just all this awareness of the history that they're then being able to have a conversation with, and we're included in that conversation. So I don't know. I think that that's what's so exciting to me about all of these like even Into the Spider-Verse does it so well.
Yeah, Into the Spider-Verse is a magnificent piece of work. I was so happy when that won the Oscar for best
I
animation.
know.
I just thought, yeah, what an achievement that story was. So emotionally powerful. Um, and the beauty, and again,
And
Miles Morales
cool.
is Miles, yeah, and very
Yeah.
cool. Miles
Yeah.
Morales and his relationship to his father is so
Yeah.
powerful in that story. And without going too much into detail with the Miles Morales game, they don't beat you over the head with that. They're not throwing flashbacks at you or anything like that of him with his dad or anything like that. It's the clues of his relationship with his father in that story come very subtly through other characters and through, artifacts in the game and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it is quite profound. It's quite powerful. As
Yeah.
somebody who was
Well,
really who's doing that kind of stuff really just to get a few trophies, just doing those kind of corners, because they don't beat you over the
yeah,
head
yeah,
with
yeah.
it. To
Yeah.
do those kind of sections of the game really that are kind of side missions, side kind
Yeah.
of
Well,
content. I was so engrossed in it.
and even in one of the first missions, you're having Christmas at his house or his
Mhm.
apartment, and you're tasked with putting on music for the dinner.
Mm.
And so you go back to your mom's bedroom and you go through your dad's like vinyls, and it even lays out like the connection that these vinyls have to his dad, and he like says it in a voiceover or whatever, or to himself. And but then it allows you to pick
Mm.
based on like the knowledge that it gives you. Then it's like, okay, now you pick. And like I wonder if that the songs change based on what you pick. I would assume so, but
Yeah,
because then there's a
maybe. Yeah.
cutscene later on. So but
Somebody's probably done that in YouTube, I'd say.
yeah.
Somebody's probably done a collage of that. You know what? As we're talking about Miles Morales, it does feel to me that we're done with Peter Parker as the front and center lead of Spider-Man movies and Spider-Man games moving
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
That's going to be, I don't know, my
Yeah.
bet. I think I'm trying to think how does Spider-Man 2 play? Is it going to be us, switching back and forth between the two Spider people?
I hope it's
Uh,
co-op.
yeah, they may very well do that, but I
Yeah.
think the story is going to very much be Miles Morales' story. Obviously, working very closely with him, but in the same way that, uh, yeah, I just feel that he's now the most
He's
interesting.
got the most room.
He's the most, yeah, he's the one with the most room to grow and explore in ways that we haven't seen yet. I think they've built up so many interesting characters surrounding him that Peter, like, we know MJ. We know these
Yeah.
characters have come with a lot of baggage from other movies and so on, and it's hard to get it really excited about. Oh, look, it's MJ. Yeah, it'll be cool to
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
her again, but it's not a new character for us. He's got these great characters. His mother, who's a politician, so much room you can do with that. And then he's got his best friend Genki, who's like a hacker or a coder, and they're making an app, and I think he's working on a video game as well. And there's just so much positive vibes around all of those characters that it makes perfect sense to ramp up our focus on them in order to counterbalance what will probably be a deeply tragic story at its heart. One where
Yeah.
maybe Peter Parker actually gets killed, which would mirror into the
I've been waiting
Spider-Verse
for
and
it,
stuff.
so
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that might be the direction they move in. But you know, I don't know. But it does feel that Miles Morales is the front and center, and that is the great achievement of the 2018 game. Is it puts this it's very very subtle. You don't think like they're going to steal focus away from Peter. They don't steal focus. They make you want to shift your focus, Miles,
Mm-hmm.
and that is
Yeah.
such an achievement. Before we wrap up, I think it's worth just kind of putting the, you know, we opened this conversation talking about the future of Microsoft's, you know, exclusive IPs and you know, and a lot of people are wondering where PlayStation is going to go now as a reactionary move or whatever. I think when we're looking at PlayStation exclusive IPs, there are common trends across all of them. I think they do all fit into a kind of a consistent vision of what PlayStation likes to do with their stories. I don't know if that's a good thing or, you know, but I do start to see a lot of similarities the more I think about it. You know, the idea of you've got Joel and Ellie, the kind of the mentor and the protege in a kind of a different guise. Kratos and his son, absolutely following that same kind of pathway. And now we're seeing it with Spider-Man and Miles as well. And it does feel to me that that is a common trope that PlayStation likes to lean into, and is resulting in. I mean, if you ask like what are the most successful or popular first-party IPs that PlayStation has in terms of these types of stories, or you know, these types of journey, these types of games, you know, outside of maybe I don't know racing games or you know whatever non-action adventure games, this is the recipe that's working for them. I have no doubt the next Ghost of Tsushima game will feature some sort of partnership mechanic as well in it.
Yeah.
Uncharted did as well. Sorry, I mean, how did I forget about
Yeah.
Uncharted? You know, it's across the board. It's the same, and I don't know if that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It kind of does feel like they're just playing the same card again and again.
Yeah.
Proof that I can be critical of PlayStation. You know, the more I think about it, the more I wonder how different are they actually. But you know, yeah, they are. Really,
I haven't played God of War, so.
Oh, you do need to try that one. It's and the new God of War is coming out this year as well, and it will have that same
thing.
It'll have the same mechanic, and
yeah,
it does feel that is what PlayStation is doing. I mentioned at the beginning, you know, International Women's Day, they'll show off all the great female characters they've got. International, or you know, Father's Day, they'll show off the father figures of those games and all that kind of stuff.
Even Deathloop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always that same dynamic.
Yeah,
and I love it, but at the same time, even Death Stranding is you walking around with a baby on your chest that you know, could conceivably years, you know, if they made a sequel to Death Stranding, you could conceivably imagine that now the child is like 10 years old and following you around on your missions or something, you know, like
spoilers for Death Stranding.
It does feel that that's where it's kind of going.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know. It's a the PlayStation recipe doesn't seem that smart now, does it?
Yeah, you just broke your love for PlayStation.
I love Spider-Man. I think it's a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, do check it out because you don't have it. It doesn't try and lecture you on Marvel. It doesn't try and tie in a bunch of other stories. You don't feel like you have to have read a bunch of comics before you get into it. It's like a real encyclopedia for Spider-Man, in the same way that the Arkham games were an encyclopedia of Batman content, you know, and very similar gameplay as well. So yeah, it's just a masterclass in superhero game design, I think.
Yeah.
And as you say, the opening line of the script, feels great to be Spider-Man.
Yep. It feels awesome that we're Spider-Man.
It feels
and they achieved it.
Absolutely, yeah. Guys, thanks for listening today. We'll be back with another video tomorrow. And if you haven't already, as I said, follow us on social media. Links in the description. Check us out on our website, thescriptdepartment.net, for loads more cool content. And also subscribe to the channel and the podcast if you haven't already. Just search for The Script Department. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks, Caleb.